Hey, what's up everyone, Ragey Golden Nico here, having way too much fun as always. And today we're going to be getting into some massive hypocrisy from Google, who seems to have forgotten do no evil, but then again I guess it's okay since in their own sick twisted minds they're good. And of course full credit and thanks go to Breitbart for leaking these documents. And the insanity begins right off the bat. Very first slide, the Good Censor. Really, the Good Censor. What's next, the Good Rapist? Honestly, I wouldn't be too surprised if I saw that in current year, but this tagline right here, holy shit. How can Google reassure the world that it protects users from harmful content while still supporting free speech? And this is a very dangerous line of feeling when you consider that literally anything that disagrees with the regressive narrative is viewed as harmful content. But either way, to answer your question right now, there is one and only one solution, and it's called lying. And luckily they're already on that, so I guess there's not much more to say here. And after the title, we got the next page of the presentation proper. And goddamn, already over there on the left, can Google protect free speech and police harmful content? Well, we kinda already went into that. But some of these bolded bits. Debates about who can and should be heard on the internet rage like never before. Well, yeah, that's because us free speech advocates are once again fighting the totalitarians, who completely unironically still view themselves as the good guys. And then moving on, as governments struggle to apply existing legislation to the Wild West online, users are asking if the openness of the internet should be celebrated after all. And that's a pretty interesting way to spin what's going on here, because I would have said it differently. What I would have done is point out people are wondering if we need all of this existing legislation to begin with. Perhaps it was always a complete overreach of power and never should have been there in the first place. But since Google is now the man instead of the underdog, of course they're not going to agree with this sentiment. But either way, we're not going to get into this entire thing because goddamn, this thing's like 85 pages long and I'm going to be here all day. So to finish off this slide, the final question, who should be responsible for censoring quote-unquote unwanted conversation anyway? Governments? Users? Google? Well, given the three options they have there, obviously it's the users. Every individual person has the ability to use a block button. If they don't like something, they don't have to look at it. If someone keeps trying to talk to them despite the fact that they told them to stop, they could block them. It's easy. Anyone who feels otherwise has no business being on the internet as far as I'm concerned. But let's get some other choice quotes out of this while we're here. For example, we got this page. The internet was also founded on utopian principles of free speech. And this is hilarious coming from a bunch of socialists, right? Free speech is the utopian principle? Although from what we're seeing right now, they may be right in that. At the very least, until we get a completely decentralized, impossible to regulate and censor platform, no matter how much it starts out supporting free speech, it never fails that eventually, as the platform gets too big for its britches, someone's gonna get a bit too full of themselves and the censorship is gonna start creeping in more and more. As usual, it starts with, we're just gonna censor these naughty words for common decency, and then next thing you know, every place has a trust and safety council, and everyone who disagrees with them is being promptly booted. Oh, and before moving on, we gotta stop at this very important slide right here. And this is important because I've brought up before that the best way to fight these censorious tech giants is to remove their safe harbor protections, which is pretty much what they bring up here. As this slide points out, tech firms have legal immunity from the majority of the content posted on their platforms, unlike traditional media publications. And this is extremely important to remember because later on in this damn presentation, they pretty much admit that they're trying to be more of a publisher than a platform, which would conveniently remove this protection from them, which is exactly what I was saying that we need to do to fight back. So hopefully they literally are stupid enough to go through with this. And then a few pages down we get to this gem. How are users behaving badly? It's all the typical bullshit you would expect, but there are some pretty interesting things right here, especially this one. Reprisals and intimidation. In 2017, a Christian cartoonist was murdered in Jordan for mocking Islamist militants' visions of heaven, and I'm sure this is entirely a free speech problem. There's nothing else. There's no other factor that could have been at play here. Nah, not at all. And the second one here. While a journalist was killed in Myanmar for using Facebook to post about corruption. That one right there, it's kind of funny Google would include this in this presentation because that sounds like the government assassinated him. Once again, if we just implemented censorship and prevented any of these dissidents from speaking up, this guy wouldn't have been able to speak up and he wouldn't have been murdered, and so everyone would have lived happy, right? At least that seems to be where Google's trying to point us. And then there's this trolling one. 26% of American users are victims of internet troll. 26%? Really? That low? Holy shit, unless you literally never participate in any sort of discussion online and just keep to yourself, that number should be 100%. And actually it is. Because how do you think they got this number? It had to have come from some sort of survey. So it looks to me like 26% of Americans are snowflakes and complain about trolling, while the rest of us just accept that this is a fact of life. So this does actually restore a little bit of my faith in humanity, not gonna lie, right there. And then we do another skip and get to this gem right here. Everyone has a voice, which means the little guys and girls can now be heard. Emerging talent, revolutionaries, whistleblowers, and campaigners. But quote-unquote everyone else can shout loudly too, including terrorists, racists, misogynists, and oppressors. Yeah, like Google. They are complaining about a level playing field, which honestly is not really that much of a surprise. These are the same people that believe in equality of outcome instead of equality of opportunity. And they sure as hell hate it when anyone has the opportunity to call them on their bullshit. And then we got this tired argument. Because everything looks like the New York Times on the net, it's harder to separate fact from fiction, legitimacy from illegitimacy. And you know what? You guys are right. Though I wonder what you have to say about all these illegitimate small-time blogs calling out CNN on their lies. That's really what they're threatened by here. The big-name establishment media no longer holds a monopoly on the spread of information. Nowadays, any scrub on the scene with a camera can promptly disprove their lies. And they are not happy about having someone challenge the agendas that they constantly try to push. And moving on, the most important thing on this slide that I would have missed had Breitbart not pointed it out is actually that third little square right there. And the reason this is actually so important is not the quote itself, but who it's from. Sarah Jung, why is this important? Well, Google themselves in this briefing have been whining about the rise of hate speech, and here they are including the words of someone who is known for speaking a whole bunch of hate speech against white males in particular, and now they're being quoted as if they're some sort of authority. Well, it's good to know that Google has no problems with hate speech as long as it's hate speech that aligns with them. Oh, and moving on, right here, we have another bit of irony that's completely lost on Google. You know how they're always whining about harassment? They seriously put this here unironically. Ich bin hier, which translates to I am here, is a Facebook group created by a German man, Hannes Ley. It has 27,000 members and works like a digital flash mob fighting against hate on the internet through friendly counter-commenting on unpleasant posts. And this right here is expert-level spinning. You know what they'd be calling it if someone on our side was doing the exact same thing to them? They tend to call that dogpiling and targeted harassment. And they are seriously too stupid and lack the self-awareness to see the irony in this. Holy shit, it's no wonder they want to shut down free speech. If there's any sort of open debates to be had, they're gonna lose every single time if this is the best and brightest that they have to throw at us. If even an average dumbass with a mic like me can point this out and call it out, they stand no chance. Oh yeah, and this is the one I kinda referenced earlier. This is the slide that pretty much makes the case that these big tech firms should not be covered under the safe harbor. They pretty much admit that they're shifting towards creating well-ordered spaces for civility and safety. Something you see from editors and publishers. A publisher, right there, that's the key word. They are no longer an open platform, they are a publisher. So they need to be legally treated like one if this is what they have to do. I will once again keep saying this because this is important. If they insist on pushing for censorship, then they need to lose their safe harbor protections that they got when they were an open platform. If they want to be a publisher, then they need to be treated like one and they need to be held accountable for what they publish. I sure as hell hope to God that someone who has Trump's ear points out that he can do this, and that he actually goes through with it, and then we see how quickly these tech companies turn around and suddenly start supporting free speech again and saying, wait, we're not censoring anymore, we're not publishers anymore. Damn, I'd pay good money to see that shit. And on this topic, even Google realizes that there is even more blowback to this now. Hell, shit like this may even fit in with what I was just saying. This first intro slide right here. Being critical of big tech censorship powers was once a niche stance coming mostly from those on the right. But coincidentally, since the regressives decided to consider everybody to the right of Stalin to be an alt-right Nazi, now that pretty much everyone on the left is being censored as well, concern about big tech's abandonment of neutrality has gone mainstream. And here I'm totally gonna pretend they're referencing what I was just saying. We've heard increasingly loud calls for media-esque regulations, like losing your safe harbor. You literally wants to become a publisher, okay? So you need to be held legally liable for every single thing you publish. You either accept that or you stop censoring. It's that easy. We just need to convince Trump that this is the only way. And that's all we need to cover here. If you want to see the whole presentation or you want to read Breitbart's summary of it, which I kind of went through a lot of here, links are in the description as usual. But for the end of this video, I just need to say, I know we're going to be encountering plenty of NPCs defending this stance and this censorship, and there's multiple ways we can go about dealing with these useful idiots. First off, we can meme them a little bit, just simply retitle the document a bit as someone on Twitter did for me conveniently. How would you guys react if historians dug up a Waffen-SS briefing titled The Good Murderer? Although I guess that's not too fair since we got hindsight working in our favor here. But this is basically what we have here. An evil, power-hungry organization whose employees are deluded enough to actually believe they are the good guys. But that's just if you want to mess with them. If you actually want to turn them into free speech advocates, that's not the best way to go about it. So I ask you guys now, what's the easiest way to turn someone who is pro-censorship into a free speech advocate? The answer is actually conveniently simple. You censor them. Oh, and before you freak out, just look at it this way. These people only support censorship while they believe they have power over others and will be the ones doing the censoring. I've actually brought this up in an entire video I did like 1 or 2 years ago. This right here is exactly why every time the underdog goes to becoming the man, they move from supporting free speech to supporting censorship. It doesn't take a genius to figure out that you don't need free speech to agree with those who are in charge. You only need free speech when you're the opposition. So while these guys are the opposition, they're all about that free speech. But the second they seize control, they suddenly support censorship. And literally every single time, in their sick and twisted minds, they believe they are the righteous ones. They honestly believe what they are doing is for some greater good. Like any proper villain, they don't see themselves as evil at all. But when the tables turn and they find themselves being censored, all of a sudden they pull a complete 180 and support free speech. So this is why I say it's time to take the kid gloves off. Someone has to grow some damn balls and become the monster we need to win this fight. And since most of quote-unquote our side seems to be filled with cucks who view any sort of retaliation as being just as bad as them, I guess it's kinda obvious who has to do it, huh? I say it's time to start deplatforming and censoring everyone who supports censorship. And while I may have originally said and done that as a half joke here on my channel from time to time, I honestly believe it now. As I literally just said, what quicker way to turn a pro-censorship authoritarian into a freedom lover than to censor them? If we want to grow our side, we simply need to put our enemies on the receiving end of what they're doing to us. And yeah, I know, there isn't anything we can do about Google or other big tech corporations. But we sure as hell can stomp out their supporters on other platforms whenever we come across them, especially when you consider that the smaller platforms that actually support free speech will quickly end up replacing them at this rate. Now, ideally, we want to push them to the point that they try to implement blanket laws and policies to make censorship of any kind difficult, if not impossible. And then when they finally go through with it, we agree with them 100% and pass it unanimously. But we all know how these things go. We will need to force them into that position, because at first, they will inevitably try to make very specific policies only protecting the few things they care about. And our response has to be to press them harder until they eventually come to a blanket solution. So yeah, show the censors how horrible censorship is by censoring them every chance you get. It's unfortunate, but this is literally the only way these idiots ever even have a chance of learning if they're not too far gone. And so I gotta say guys, thanks for listening.